Good evening and welcome to Barcelona. Although I have some UK decorations there, but actually we are in Barcelona. If you can see, it's 8 o'clock at night and there is still some sunlight out there, so it gives an indication. Anyway, today I'd like to talk about I won't say so much of debate, and you won't find much on YouTube about it, but basically about Porsche sports cars and whether it's still true that if you had the money, you would get a 911. You would only get a Boxster or a Cayman if you couldn't afford a 911. For me personally, that is now not the case. I test drove a 911, and I do recommend you do the same thing if you're actually interested in entering the debate or interested in making a purchase. Drive a 911, then immediately afterwards, the same day, the same morning, the same afternoon, get in a Boxster or a Cayman, ideally an S, because that will give you the closest horsepower to whichever 911 you've just driven. And I think, certainly for me, you will notice that the car feels a lot more nimble. It just feels, without going into technical terms, it feels a lot more sports car-like. The 911, and I've driven some older 911s, are great. However, the new 911, although it's still a fantastic car, it certainly doesn't feel slow, but it does feel that bit bigger. And if you put an old 911 next to a new 911, you'll see the reason why. And the reason why is because it is much bigger. It's around about 25% bigger width-wise and length-wise than it was 40 years ago. And slowly but surely it's got that way, but over the last 10 years I believe it's got quite a bit bigger. I'm used to driving a Lotus 7, well a Westfield, which is the same thing, in South America, and that car is one of the narrowest cars you can drive, and that's not a single seater, and that car feels extremely comfortable to me. The seats are very comfortable, bucket seats, which you might not think because you're virtually sat on the floor. But the car feels as if it can go into spaces that other cars simply can't. If you're overtaking, it just gives you a lot more confidence, and even going around a corner, if you did lose the back end a little bit, you've got an extra foot to play with because it's so much narrower than a standard car. So for me, starting the debate with size, I feel as if the Cayman or the Boxster win that section. However, if you have children, which I don't, which I'd like to, by the way, then the 911 will be your trump card if you're trying to convince your wife, well, we should get a second car. Well, this car is a sports car, but it also has seats in the back, so we can go at the weekend with the kids, etc., etc. Yes. The reality might be something different because the seats are quite uncomfortable and pretty unpractical, same as in a BMW 6 Series. For a small adult, you can maybe manage 20 or 30 minutes. After that, it's backache, neck ache, leg ache, every sort of ache you can imagine. So, in terms of luggage space, yes, the 911 wins over. But in terms of size, sports car feel, I believe the Cayman and the Boxster win over. I think most Porsche pure enthusiast drivers or people that work for Porsche will tell you the Cayman and Boxster is a more sporty car in terms of what it can do. But of course you will hardly ever find a like-for-like power comparison. And moving on to the power, with the Porsche 911 being the flagship model, obviously the high-end 911 will always have that bit more power than a high-end Cayman or Boxster. So GT4, I can't remember how much power it had, maybe it had 375 horsepower compared to a GT3 575, for example. Boxster Spider, the same thing. A GTS, I think the current GTS 718 will have about 365 brake horsepower, whereas the current GTS 911 will have about 450. So almost 100 horsepower difference. Of course, the 911 is that little bit heavier, but it's not 30% heavier. So, in terms of power, yes, the 911 will win out, and in terms of straight line speed, the 911 will win out because of that extra power. However, in terms of feel, even though a 911 may well go around the track a little bit faster, because you have a mid-engine in the Cayman or the Boxster, and because it is that little bit lighter, I still am convinced that that car does feel, even though it's a tiny bit slower, it does feel the more sports-like car. That's like saying in my Lotus 11, I might go slower around a track than a Porsche Cayman or a Porsche Cayenne even, the supercharged one. But I will feel and I will enjoy a lot more my experience because it feels more sports car like. What next? The looks. I never used to like the Cayman or the Boxster. And pretty much I'd gone off them and didn't even pay any attention to them for quite a few years. However, recently I went to a car show in South America and I seen the new 718s about 6 months ago, and I was very impressed. Just the subtle changes they've made. And the original Boxster seemed to have at the back end, or from where the roof is to the back end, it seemed to go up in a shape like that. It seemed, I don't know, almost like a humpback whale. It just didn't make any sense to me. I didn't find it a very attractive car at all. The Cayman, when it first came out, and for quite a few years afterwards, had its wheel arches that kind of came up like that. So yes, they're wide, but that's not a huge issue. But the way they came up and out of the car, again, for me, my personal taste, I didn't like it at all either. Now, both of those cars seem to have mellowed a little bit in their design, and I now find them not quite as good looking as a 911, but very close. So yes, a 911 will win out in terms of pure looks, but the 718s are getting there. Image. Now, image is an interesting one. Image for a 911, well, in the 80s, at least in the UK, it was not a popular car. It was a yuppie's choice, someone that liked to show that they'd been successful, liked to show the wealth they had. I'm sure it was a very good car, but to me, I'm not a big fan of spoilers. So the Porsche 911 Turbo of the mid-80s was a huge spoilered car, and for me, quite ugly, although I'm sure it was one of the best cars around. So if you have a Porsche, a Ferrari, an Aston Martin, Lamborghini, Jaguar in a car park, in the UK at least, I don't know what it's like in other countries, and one of them is going to be keyed, which is a disgusting thing to do, but if it was going to be keyed, I'm pretty sure, even today, it would be the Porsche that would be keyed. There you have your answer to the image. I believe, can't swear to it yet, but maybe I will in 6 months' time, that if you had a Cayman or a Boxster, I think the chances of getting it keyed and the chances of getting ugly looks are a lot less. When I see a Ferrari, which I don't find that many of them that attractive, but some of them are, and when I see a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, I always think, oh, rich kid or show off. And with a 911, I tend to think the same thing, but they just not showing off quite as much. But with a Boxster or a Cayman, I don't think they're showing off. I just think they bought a sports car. They haven't spent as much as a house on it. They enjoy driving, and it's a more purist car. That's the image, at least, I perceive for those cars. What else? Well, the price. I can honestly say that if I could get a similarly powered, let's say a 400 horsepower Cayman and a 400 horsepower 911, neither one of them without a huge spoiler, similar interior, similar extras, I would, because of the image to a certain extent, and because of the feel of driving, I would choose the Cayman or a Boxster. The 911 is a great car, but I would get it if I was going to make several trips across Europe and if I had an awful lot of luggage to take. Otherwise, I would stick with a Boxster or a Cayman. I did have a 911 on order. I cancelled it, and now I'm looking to get a Boxster or a Cayman. So feel free to comment down below, but if you want me to take your comments seriously, then have done what I request, and go and drive a 911, then immediately drive a Cayman or a Boxster, and base your opinions on that. But anyway, let's have a debate. Let's see what you think as well.